if you're like me and you're a creative person in recovery or curious about that, then hopefully you'll be able to appreciate that it feels different to be a creative person in recovery. It feels like something is missing once we make that plunge and decide not to live with drink and drugs in our lives. And I think there is a reason that it hits us differently. You know, I don't want to make myself or other creative people in recovery sound special, but we are complicated people. That's the truth, you know. The hardest part of early recovery for me when I first decided to stop using drink and drugs was threefold, really. There's three reasons. There's boredom, there's loss of identity, and this sense of like not having any inspiration anymore. And I'm going to touch on the loss of identity a bit further down in the video, but boredom and lack of inspiration are really connected, in my opinion. And part of the reason it feels hard for creatives in early recovery is because we don't know what to do with boredom and we're expecting to be inspired all the time. I'll touch on those as well later, but just quickly, boredom is necessary for creative people, 100%. I used to feel like sitting around doing nothing was a waste of time, but actually having nothing to do with my brain and my body is one of the best ways to be visited by inspiration. And those two things are intrinsically linked, in my opinion. It's something I've touched on in videos previously, and I'll continue to touch on in the future about how we are not bored enough these days, you know, and it's a big problem for creative people in recovery. So addiction, in my opinion, often fuels our identity. In my experience, it definitely did. You know, I really lived that stereotype of the tortured artist. I thought of myself as some, I don't know, when I went to uni, I was partying all the time and, you know, doing drugs, and it's that whole lifestyle, isn't it? Like sex, drugs and rock and roll, but no one really mentions like the negative side of that sex, drugs and rock and roll, which is like mental health problems, suicidal ideation and isolation, you know what I mean? Maybe that should be a new catchphrase for addicted people, addicted creative people. So my identity very much revolved around this like stereotype of the tortured artist, and we all know the story. There's 100 different stories we could tell, you know, the 27 Club, all the famous people that died at 27 who were extremely talented musicians and writers, but also addicts and suicidal and depressed and either committed suicide or overdosed, or, you know. So without that identity, who are we as creative people? And when I first came into recovery, it was really, really tricky for me to figure that out, you know, because my whole life revolved around being that tortured artist and coming to terms with the fact that I don't need to be tortured to be an artist and a creative person has been really hard, but really beautiful and really meaningful. And it's been one of the best decisions to accept that fact that I've ever made, you know, that being tortured does not necessarily mean we're going to be successful as artists. Another key point, I think, really, about why recovery feels harder for creative people is that our creative mind really craves intensity, I find. You know, it craves a real depth of thought and a depth of soul and a burning passion for whatever it is that we do. And recovery at first can feel quite flat in comparison to the epic highs and lows of active addiction. You know, when we're using a lot of mind-altering substances, our mood necessarily is going to be up and down and up and down. And if I wasn't feeling extremely high or extremely low, I was feeling extremely numb, you know. And that numbness was probably the main feeling that I carried through to my early recovery, that sort of flatness, that kind of lack of life, that lack of spark. And I think as creative people in recovery, we've really got to work hard to reignite that spark and to sort of reconnect our brain in a different way to appreciate life without the use of these incredibly powerful substances that we put into our bodies. You know, I think we overlook the fact that drink and drugs are so powerful in the fact that they change our mind, they change our behaviour, they change the way that we move our bodies. changed the way that we're capable of speaking and comprehending things. Yeah, really, really powerful stuff that we're playing with. I've often thought, you know, am I even creative without the chaos? And I've touched on this in videos before, you know, and it's going back to that whole tortured artist myth, isn't it? It's like the chaos was so intertwined with my own perception of what it meant to be an artist that without the chaos that I intentionally put myself in, you know, I found it really difficult. You know, the peace and the quiet is still something that doesn't come naturally to me. You know, I'm 5.5 years into this recovery journey now, and yeah, the calmness is still a bit strange at the best of times, but it gets better, that's for sure. And I can say now, you know, quite confidently that with the hard work I've put in, you know, doing the work and getting help for myself and becoming what I would deem a real artist, you know, without the chaos, without that torture, that daily torture, that need to consume drink and drugs or put things from outside of us, inside of us to make us feel better about whatever it is. You know, it has got better over time, and I can say that it will for you as well if you put a bit of work in. And I do feel, unfortunately, that like linking back to this idea that recovery is harder for creative people, when we come into recovery as creative people, we face a kind of double loss. So it's not only the loss of the substance and the comfort that gave to us, but it's also the loss of this supposed inspiration, which I touched on earlier. And I think that's really crucial, you know. I can't explain how shattering it was to come into recovery as a creative person and have everything flipped on it completely on its head. And I know that other people are out there, they are experiencing that right now. You might be one of those people in early recovery. You might be dabbling with the idea of stopping, and you might be wondering about what it's going to be like. And I'm here to say that it is going to be tricky at first, but it's really, really worthwhile to stick it out for the long term, you know, and kind of learn how to navigate this double loss, so to speak. And you know, if recovery does feel harder for you, like it's okay to feel broken, but it's not okay to be broken forever, you know. Things do get better. We are wired differently. I do believe that. And I don't say that to kind of put ourselves on a pedestal, you know, like look at us creative people in recovery. But, you know, linking back to that double loss, I think in my own experience, okay, one, as someone who's struggled with addiction, most people in the general public haven't struggled with addiction. So that puts me in a smaller little box somewhere. But then within that small box that I found myself in, I realised that most people in that box aren't inherently creative. That they don't, you know, draw, paint, read, write, you know, play music, dance, theatre, whatever your practice might be. So I found myself in an even smaller box than before, you know. And it's the way I want to frame this is not that it's. I don't think I'm special. I don't think that we're special, and I don't think it's helpful for us to act as though we're special, but it is important to acknowledge that we sit in this kind of unique spot where we have issues with substances and we're also creative people, you know. And I think that is a pretty unique combination. I don't meet many people like that in day-to-day life, and I do spend a lot of my time in recovery communities, that's for sure. And so the point of these videos, the point of this channel, the point of me trying to carry a message to other people who are creative and who are in recovery is that there are other people like us out there. The beautiful thing about the internet is that we can quite easily connect with anyone, anywhere these days. And so what I'm trying to do is like take this small box that I found myself in as a creative person in recovery, and I'm trying to make that box bigger now to accommodate a larger community of other people who feel the same, and other people who I can perhaps lend some wisdom to, guide in whatever capacity that might be, and connect with, because connection is key. It's really, really important. So if this has resonated with you, as always, please let me know in the comments. Please give it a share, a thumbs up, whatever it might be. Subscribe if you feel so inclined to do so. You know, this little channel is growing now, and I think I'm in it for the long haul. You know, it feels like a very authentic way for me to express myself vocally. And so let me know how being in recovery has affected your creativity. Or if you are thinking about taking the plunge, let me know what you're worried about in the comments, or what you're struggling with, or what perhaps you would like help with the most, because that is also really helpful for me to know about what I'm trying to do is like think about how I used to feel back in the day, you know, 5.5 years ago, or even 6-7 years ago when I was really in the madness. But now obviously there's quite a bit of time and distance between me of then and me of now. So yeah, let me know where you're up to, and let me know what you're struggling with at this moment and where you're up to on your own journey. All that stuff is really helpful, and already I appreciate the comments and the support and the authentic connection that I'm receiving through YouTube. I'm very grateful for it, so thanks.